That's what's been driving the battery evolution that we've seen. Hadn't it been for EVs, also we wouldn't have been able to deploy that many batteries.
A lot of that has to do with bringing in the right volume of capital at the right time. If we have to realize our clean energy goals by 2050, we have to deploy about $12 trillion in India alone.
I just can tell you our equipment with the highest capacity, one equipment gives you 1.3 gigawatt, one equipment, right? Whereas maybe 10 years ago, you had 100 megawatt.
It's not a phrase that I particularly like, the solar coaster, but it does reflect the ups and downs, sometimes rapid, in the solar industry, and it can also be applied right across the clean energy sectors, including battery energy storage, e-mobility, and electrification. More generally, driven by policy, sometimes there are steep declines, and that leaves a lot of havoc in its wake. A lot of businesses go bankrupt. Companies are not around to fulfill their warranties. That made the discussion of business resilience in this episode of the podcast a particularly prescient one. And my guests were Ivan Saha. He's the CEO of renewable manufacturing for Reliance Industries in India. Ivan has a long history in the Indian solar manufacturing sector. He was also the CEO of Vikram Solar. Another guest was Sebastian Gatz from German production equipment supplier Fonadena. Sebastian's worked for pretty much the who's who of the German solar production equipment landscape, many of who are not around today, sadly, but he's representing Fonadena, which has been a pillar of strength in the solar industry over many years. And the two gentlemen were joined by Josephine Berg, a policy analyst in particular with S&P Global, and who has also got a long track record of tracking the solar industry. There were three great guests with three different perspectives to discuss business resilience in the clean energy landscape. And it is a difficult business to be in with ever declining prices and an extremely competitive business landscape. My name's Jonathan Gifford, and this is a special series of the Smartery podcast. Ivan Saha, Sebastian Gatz, Josephine Berg, thank you very much for joining the Powering Through podcast here at the Smartery 2025. It's great to have you with us today. Josephine, first of all, so we're talking business resilience within the solar and energy storage industries. Of course, we've seen a lot of turbulence over the years, over the last 10, 15 years. We've seen a lot of companies who haven't been successful. What kind of role has policy played and the individual markets in terms of those failures or even successes?
Yeah, because I want to start with that this policy, without policy, without Germany, Japan, Spain, Italy, without them starting the policy the policy drive for solar, we wouldn't have been where we are today. Panels would probably be at $5 per watt because those support schemes, the feed-in tariffs, that's what created the scale and what allowed businesses to ramp up globally and to get this, to get where we are today with very cheap technology and very advanced technology. So there's been a success part of the policy, but then how it was managed, the policies, as we know, they were too generous. There was this boom and bust cycle, and the Chinese manufacturers were very quick at grabbing the opportunity during the boom. And when the European market bust, the Chinese were still, they were able to retract to their home market. Then demand was created. They had policy support in their home market, and Chinese demand evolved. Whereas the non-Chinese players didn't really have that backup demand to follow.
To rely on. Yeah. So policymakers, policy is a key driver of renewable deployment over the years. And policy can actually be used by individual countries to support their industry. We saw in the history of the modern solar industry in Germany, where we are now, we saw a change of policy, a lack of support, and then a number of really industry-leading companies failed relatively quickly. People like Q-Cells or companies like Q-Cells, Conergy, SolarWorld. There's a very long list. Also, equipment suppliers. Sebastian Gutz, as a German equipment supplier, what do you see has been some of the ways that companies have been resilient here in Germany? What have been some of the keys for their success?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me and bringing the perspective for equipment supplier here in the game. For sure, people at the beginning or after this feed-in tariffs really underestimated the speed of Chinese equipment and ramping up, right, and backed by the government, right. From my point of view, the adaptability is very important for Western suppliers from technology, but also from structural point of view. So those who focus more on innovation, on high value niche, and also who are able to be more upstream, had the better chance for being successful. However, we as an equipment supplier, we really had to focus on our core technology, which is vacuum coating, right? And really go all the way in upscaling this technology and looking for strategic partners on a global stage, right? There's no way that you can do it by your own, even as an equipment supplier, even if the equipment or the production of solar cells and modules moved to the east.
Yeah, but being a technology leader alone isn't enough because, of those companies that I mentioned, Q-Cells was a real pioneer with PERC technology, SolarWorld with glass and durability with their products. They had good products. They drove really the technology forward, but they still met a pretty severe and sometimes abrupt end. Ivan Saha, now being involved in solar manufacturing as you have at Vikram Solar for many years, now in a new role with Reliance. What's your feeling in terms of how India has been able to foster solar manufacturing, really in recent years, seen an acceleration of these companies and very successful manufacturing footprints being established? What's the secret to the success?
I think from the Indian context, it's been majorly the government's initiative. So Mr. Modi has been from the beginning, since he was the PM, for the last 11 years, he's been relentlessly pursuing climate change and renewables in India. And we have been, I would say, in the Indian context, far ahead of what we have promised so far to the world in the Paris Agreement. Essentially, it's the decarbonization which is driving the agenda in India, not only for setting up large capacities of projects in wind and solar, bringing in battery storage in a big way, and also changing the decarbonization agenda in terms of hydrogen, bioenergy, a little bit of nuclear also. All of that mix will play a part in our goal of achieving net zero by 2070. And that's the mission where all stakeholders, which the government has been able to bring in the Indian diaspora, have been totally focused on this single agenda: decarbonization, setting up large renewable clean power capabilities, and then associatedly getting back upstream into setting up manufacturing to support the same.
Now, if I could jump in here, I agree that it's very clear there is a very coherent and consistent agenda. But sometimes when we hear from European policymakers, we hear very similar things: a commitment to decarbonization, growing green jobs, a just energy transition, these kind of lofty goals. But still, the German and the European PV manufacturers and even more lately battery manufacturers have struggled and failed. What's the difference in
So
India
I think
even?
a lot of that has to do with bringing in the right volume of capital at the right time for the industry. If we have to, I mean, these are estimates. If we have to realize our clean energy goals by 2050, we have to deploy about $12 trillion in India alone for everything that we are planning to do. The government has been uh, very quick to understand this and move accordingly, in all sorts of support for that. That's one. Secondly, driving costs down through reverse auction. This, for clean technologies, has been pioneered by India, I would say. First time somebody did that reverse auction started in 2011, no, 2014. So discovering new price points and driving down the cost of solar power delivered. Today, in India, the cost of battery plus solar combined, RTC, round the clock power, is about 4 cents a unit. It's one of the lowest. And large capacities have been brought in because of that. So policy with financial support and a whole lot of new initiatives by the government, like bringing in, domestic manufacturing and new technologies, promoting them, etc. I think all of this played a big role.
And that's 4 cents a kilowatt hour, kind of firmed solar power.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's quite a milestone. Sebastian, India also has some trade protectionism, some measures to support their domestic manufacturers. What's your take on the role of these kind of measures? Can they hold back the market, or is it more important to foster some domestic capacity?
No, right. I mean, you're right. And in addition to your measures, it's a productive linked incentives, right?
Absolutely.
It's a key measure in India to bring this local production for also the market in India, right? Back. And a similar thing is true also for United States with the Inflation Reduction Act, right? So also there promote local production in order also to be having kind of protected market, right? And this is not the case in Europe. I mean, you ask for the differentiator to Europe and India and United States, and there's for sure no real protection mechanism for starting companies, building up gigawatt production. It's not so easy. And having competing with maybe very cheap products from Asia, it's a hard thing, right? And these are protective measurements to, let's say, get the gigawatt production started. For sure, on the long term, you have to compete on a global stage, but I think that's measures which you need also for Europe to get a competitive landscape here.
Okay, so some attracting of capital, the large volumes of capital that's needed, the supporting of manufacturing, creating some kind of protected market. Josephine, Sebastian mentioned the US. I imagine at S&P Global, your analysts have been very busy in recent
Very.
weeks with the US tariffs. It's effectively a trade embargo, this kind of level of tariffs as they're applied to, in our industry, Chinese EVs, Chinese solar panels, Chinese batteries. That will damage the market, will it not? Right across the supply chain, because there's a balancing act between some level of protectionism, if you want to encourage local manufacturing, but also we have to deploy. We have to solve the climate crisis that we're facing. What's your take on how these two imperatives can be balanced?
Exactly. You need the demand as well. And the question is how you also support the demand in an environment with protection, with protection against cheaper technologies, and how you combine that to make sure that you get the scale, that the incentives that you give for the manufacturing, that you get to that scale. But to get to that scale, you also need to make sure that there's enough demand, that you have reliable demand. And I think that's what India's been proving to do. And we will see now how it can move forward now in this, because it's a new environment also in India for demand, because what we've seen being installed so far hasn't been with that much local content. So how the market will react to the new new situation. The U.S. also, I think, mainly for storage, that's where we see the big challenge, because there isn't manufacturing. There aren't batteries made in the U.S. that could meet what we thought was the demand for batteries. So that's where we're analyzing very in detail. Solar is a bit more resilient in that sense. But the question is also then,
is that because it's already cheap enough?
I mean, the U.S. is all. I mean, it's the most expensive market in the world for solar, but it's still at a price. The price level, the market has gotten used to that level, and with we will also see what happens to tax credits, etc., and what will happen to support for demand. But since there has been support also on the demand side, that has worked out, and we have all this local manufacturing up and coming in the U.S. But also still now everything is very uncertain. So what I say now, in a week, maybe we'll have to say something else. Who knows? But there is, at least on the solar side, it's a bit more resilient.
And it's important. It's interesting about energy storage because we're seeing storage in certain markets in the US, in California, in Texas, energy storage playing a really huge role in terms of strengthening the grid and meeting these evening peaks. So it's kind of at the crucial point of the market development.
Exactly. And if you don't get enough storage, maybe that could threaten also the solar deployment, of course.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about storage, energy storage, battery manufacturing in just a second. But while we're talking about the US marketplace for Indian manufacturers, I imagine that could be seen as an opportunity. And we've already seen export volumes from certain Indian manufacturers to the US pick up.
Absolutely.
How attractive is that?
I think it's a pretty exciting market. Last year, if my numbers are correct, we exported almost 3 to 3.5 gigawatt of modules and cells to US. US, look, on the module side, there's hardly any difference between the technology side, at least, between Chinese and Indian manufacturers. Almost the same power class, same warranties, similar. And if it comes from a good brand, then the US customers are quick to change. And since the last 1 year, after China, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, these countries were shut out of the value chain in US. India has figured to be amongst the top importers for the US developers. So it's a good opportunity. And there's one company who's also set up local manufacturing in the US. From India, I think the markets have corrected a little bit. I mean, the prices were quite high last year. This year, it's come down a lot. But then still, there's good margins and good money to be made in the US market.
And from a manufacturing standpoint, Sebastian, I'll bring you back into the conversation. From an equipment supply standpoint, working in different markets as Fonadena does, is it possible to achieve the similar kind of performance, the similar quality that international markets demand in various locations around the world, in India, in China, in the US, and potentially back in Europe?
Absolutely. I mean, the big difference in the market is the topic about turnkey supply, right? And if you're in regions in the world where you do not have this experience, you're at least at the first step, you're looking for a turnkey supply. And that's, to be frank, you cannot get today in Europe, right? There are equipment suppliers, as we are, which really focus on their core technology in their specific field, and we are partnering up with them, right? And we have also partnering up with their research institute, which is still world-class in Europe, right? But at the end, if you need one turnkey that's not there. If you have partnering up for the whole supply chain, it's there, right? And it's competitive on this stage. And if you look then on the topic about, let's say, resilience on specific markets or specific countries, and also take this in consideration, then you should, there are manufacturers who are looking for this alternative, right? Equipment suppliers who are focusing on gigawatt scale. I just can tell you our equipment with the highest capacity, one equipment gives you 1.3 gigawatt, one equipment, right? Whereas maybe 10 years ago, you had 100 megawatt for mass production equipment. So you see this improvement, and that's where Europe is still strong in this, right? So in the design of the equipment, in high efficiency technologies. And I think there we can bring these additional value into the game.
Okay, and just to touch very briefly on technology, this applies from, PERC was the mainstream, it's moving into TOPCon now, heterojunction potentially on the near horizon. Is it the same that you can achieve high levels of quality, which we need for a resilient industry, high performance, right across different technology platforms? There used to be a bit of a narrative that, well, Europe can make good heterojunction, but it will be very difficult for India. This is no longer the case.
No, so
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so at all, because maturity of the technology and getting the cost and quality benchmark is a given. It has to be achieved. Without that, you can't call yourself a world-class manufacturer. And none of the Indian manufacturers, I'm sure, I'm speaking for all of them, have any two doubts about that. But what happens in China, in the equipment industry, Sebastian, to his point, is that the scale of adoption of a new technology happens extremely fast. And the switchover from PERC to TOPCon, it happened within 1 year. And today, China has almost close to 700 gigawatt of TOPCon manufacturing. And PERC has gone down quite a bit, almost non-existent. Multicrystalline, polycrystalline is out. When you have manufacturing of that scale, both equipment, processes, materials, and expertise comes automatically. You do that for 1 year, you have a few thousand trained engineers who can deploy this at any part of the world. And the issue with the European manufacturing was that only, the scale. Because Europe, what you said at the beginning, the large manufacturers of Europe disappeared. So either you have to have these machines sold to China or to a second destination like India. And we are pretty agnostic to having either Chinese or European equipment and processes for ourselves. For us, the cost of ownership, that not the capex, but the overall total cost of ownership over the lifetime of the product is what matters.
I 100% agree, and the cost of ownership is a very central point, or at the end, it's the levelized cost of electricity.
Absolutely.
And this can change from region to region, right? So maybe in China, where you have a very mature supply chain, this is not the case yet in India, but also United States, Turkey, and also Europe. I give you an example. We as equipment supplier develop together with the institute a so-called TOPCon process, where you do need any hazardous gases, no silane, no phosphine, where you have your experience in China, but you are not as experienced in other parts of the world. Also, to get rid of this, our manufacturers are really looking forward to it, right? Because it saves them a lot of costs in the infrastructure, which might be not as expensive in China, but in other parts of the region. although in the supply of the gases, in the cost of the gases are different in the different parts of the world, and therefore this all comes into the cost of ownership and levelized cost of electricity. And there, Europe can make the difference, right, with their overall approach in the different regions. And I just talk about TopCon, and there are other examples like tandem technology and so forth, where Europe can really differentiate to other regions.
Yeah, well, so that's a hopeful message for here in Europe. But let's turn to battery manufacturing, which has been less of a positive story once again here in Europe. I'm sad to say, Northvolt, the failure of Europe's great battery manufacturing hopeful or hope, was made headlines. A lot of public money went into that company. I think just last week or very recently, Great Cells, another manufacturer, experienced difficulties. Josephine, when you look as an analyst at the solar manufacturing landscape, and it has been a tumultuous one, it's a difficult market. It's not an easy industry to be always chasing higher efficiency, higher productivity, lower cost constantly. It's relentless to compete. How similar is the battery marketplace as you see it? Is it as difficult as solar has proven to be?
It's more difficult. Solar is a breeze in comparison.
And why is that?
It's a whole other different level of complexity. And I think you could probably speak more on the technical side, but just all the risks that you have to manage, the performance of the batteries, the supply chain, everything is more complex, and that's what makes it more difficult. To be crass, like you can have module assembly plants set up pretty quickly in a lot of parts of the world, but to do batteries, you need to think it through, and you need to get to that scale again in order to be competitive.
Yeah, but there's a very bright future for battery
Oh, yes.
deployment. We're going to need huge amounts of energy storage, and we've also got the EV industry, right? The auto industry is a pretty good customer to have when it comes to scale.
Oh, yeah, well, that's also, that's what's been driving the battery evolution that we've seen. Hadn't it been for EVs, also we wouldn't have been able to deploy that many batteries
Yeah, and
as
we've
we have
seen
so far.
Yeah, that's true. And we've seen great technological progress, great progress on cost. I think just, a standard C container a few years ago was maybe 2-3 megawatt hours of storage. Now they're talking about 6-7 in the same footprint. And at the whole time, the costs have been falling. Ivan, is this a market that you think battery manufacturing, that India is going to step into in a big way as it has with
Yeah,
solar?
absolutely. There are already a couple of players who've already announced. And see the complexity. I agree with Josephine. The complexity of battery is much higher. The reason is the changes of chemistry, the technological. The moving parts are too many as compared to solar. Chemistry, making the cell itself, um, making it reliable, and with the right features, with the right cell, with the right lifetime, etc. It's incredibly complex. It's not as simple, but then as solar. But at that, then everything goes through a life cycle. I think what battery manufacturing today all over the world is what solar was 15 years back. It's the scale and the investment and number of players that get into it more and more. I think everything is going to fall in place. And going forward, it will be battery and solar, which will be the king of renewables, I would say, the combination. In India, there's also another alternative to battery. We've been using, then the government, again, innovation, have been using pumped hydro to actually, take care of the intermittency of solar and wind, is something that the government is promoting a lot because of certain terrains and certain geographies where there are natural pump hydro sites. So a lot of pumped hydro is coming up, which actually it's large investments, takes a longer gestation period, but over a period of time, it's much easier to manage than a complex system like energy storage.
But they're very difficult projects to build.
Absolutely. But the first ones have already started working, and it's a showcase actually.
And in terms of capacity,
Oh,
you've got an
yes.
enormous storage capacity.
A gigawatt at a time.
And what about the battery supply chain, Sebastian? We know the Chinese manufacturers are far and away the market leaders. Cattle, BYD, and the way that they're integrated into the EV supply chain in China as well is very powerful. What about for equipment suppliers elsewhere in the world? Are there opportunities there?
Yeah, for sure there are. However, if you're talking about technical readiness level, as far you go, as closer you go to a mass production, as more costly it is, right? So I know there's a lot of R&D in the battery business on small TRL level, but if you go to TRL level 6, 7, 8, then you need a lot of investment. Then you need the backup of the companies, but also from states, right? So, and therefore, I think that's also missing. I'm not so deep in the battery business, but I know it from the PV, right? You need the back of the institution, the back of the states.
As an equipment supplier, because you're dealing with such enormous customers, is that what you're saying? You need to have a really huge capital
I told you
commitment.
before, and I'm sure in battery it's even more the case. Not only every process step is done by one supplier, so you need a showcase over big scale on it, right? So where different equipment suppliers and also technology supplier working together, right? And this is where you need it, where you need the back of the states, and it needs a strategic an industry strategy behind it, which is valid not only for 2 years, not for 4 years, but over a long period of time. And then I think there are a lot of, let's say, scenes from China, from India, from United States, where you're looking more on the long term, where in Europe you're more looking on a short term period, and therefore missing this industry strategy approach.
Yeah, strategic approach, long-term stability. These are all important words when it comes to building a resilient renewable energy manufacturing
Yeah, I think
sector.
the way that in solar it has been done is the government has waited for a threshold capacity to be built up in solar in manufacturing, and then they have protected that. So there was something called ALMM, which for modules, once the module capacity exceeded 50 gigawatt, then ALMM was brought in. That prevented practically anybody other than the Indian manufacturers to supply to the Indian market. And then now from June of 26, there'll be cell also will be protected once the cell capacity goes up to about 30, 40. So there's a strategy and so on and so forth with wafer and polysilicon. Those probably will come. So India probably is what he said was that like there has to be a strategic vision, a 30-year vision, for example. And you have to execute it in 5 years blocks. But then if you are having that vision, both for battery, I'm sure that's going to happen in battery as well in India. Once you have a critical mass of manufacturers setting up capacities, then we'll have protection around them.
So it's a way of dealing with this chicken and egg problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then bringing all the finance and other, state incentives, etc., power, this, that, and all coming in makes the business case all the more simple because there's large amount of investments that are involved here. People would want, there are big investors that are coming in, have already come in. There are return expectations, and therefore the markets have to be protected. And at the same time, there is a bidding trajectory of 30, 40 gigawatt every year that is being announced.
To keep driving the
So
cost
that's the
competitiveness.
demand side,
Yeah.
demand pull.
Yeah.
And then the domestic manufacturing meeting that demand. So the whole ecosystem is slowly but surely, it's taking time. India is a democracy. So it's going to take time, but it will get built.
Okay, well, perhaps lessons for other marketplaces that are looking to build a resilient manufacturing sector.
I mean, demand is there, and there are also political measures in Europe for the demand side, right? So I'm not concerned about the demand side in Europe. I'm just concerned about manufacturing side, right? So
the supply.
the supply, right? So
Yeah.
Okay. Well, final thoughts. Now we have come to the end, or drawing towards the end. Josephine, I'll come to you first. If you could kind of distill a message down in terms of building resilient renewable energy, clean technology, solar and energy storage companies, what do you think is a kind of key takeaway or a key message?
Scale. I think that's what one of the key conclusions is, that you need to get to scale. You need the capital to back that scaling, and of course you need a product that people want as well. I mean, that is competitive in the marketplace. But you need to be able to deliver that product and then scale it. And that's where I think some of the difficulties have been in creating a resilient industry in other places.
And some of the other companies we've talked about, how they've perhaps come unstuck. Ivan?
Yeah. So I think adding to what Josephine said, I think one thing that we have not discussed today is the impact of digitalization, which is changing the whole face of renewable industry. Because one of the most important cost components is labor. And in Europe, it is much more. In India, it is also high. In China, also, it's very high. I think adoption of digital technologies in manufacturing is going to go a big way in making our industry resilient, apart from everything, capital and everything. And then setting up the ecosystem around all of this, materials, people, equipment manufacturers, product manufacturers.
And that's what we've seen China do so effectively, the whole supply chain. Sebastian?
Yeah, maybe two things. The one is a strategic focus, right? That you have to know where you bring value to the market, right? And then double down on it, right? And the other thing, from my point of view, is collaboration, right? So nobody can build up a gigawatt production supply chain from themselves. So you have to collaborate on a global stage. And I think with that, you have a good chance. Also, as an equipment supplier, for sure, we would love to have a domestic market here. If it's not here, we can supply it globally.
Well, that's a good message here at the Smartery, which is an incredibly international event these days, it has to be said. Ivan Saha, thank you very much. Sebastian Gatz and Josephine Berg, thank you for joining the Powering Through podcast here at the Smartery 2025. My name's Jonathan Gifford. I'm the head of content with Climate Copy, and thanks for watching.